So, good morning, everyone. This is the August 14th meeting of the Affordable Housing Trust Working Group. I'll call the meeting to order. This is a remote meeting. So, pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15th, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place, this meeting of the Affordable Housing Trust Working Group will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information and the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and/or parties with the right and/or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the Town of Westborough's website at town.westborough.ma.us. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to watch the meeting may do so in the following manner. On Westborough TV, no in-person attendance of members of the public will generally be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time by technological means. In the event that we are unable to do so, despite best efforts, we will post on the Town of Westborough's website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting. This Westborough TV is recording this session here this morning, and so those recordings will also be available on demand on the westboroughtv.org website and their YouTube channel. We do have members of the public who are volunteering to work with the committee, although not formally appointed. Those folks who are actively involved in the work of the committee are joining us here today as well. And so I want to thank everyone for joining in. Let me share the agenda on the screen just to go over that with the public. Give it a second there. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see the agenda. We're starting out, our agenda is fairly simple today. We'll start out with approval of minutes of our July 31st, 2020 meeting. We'll then go into a discussion of the second draft of our recommendations and action plan, which Ed has been pulling together and has pulled in a lot of research. We'll then look at, we'll do that for about 20-25 minutes or so. If needed, then we'll discuss and review the governance information that Hank and Steve had pulled together. And finally, we'll have a discussion on the community engagement effort underway. I'll provide an update on Co-Urbanize, and we can look at, if we're ready to, we can look at draft survey questions. We'll finish up by discussing next step and action items, and then we will adjourn. So I want to thank folks for joining us today, and at this point I'll stop presenting. And so the first item of business are any questions or comments or corrections to the minutes of last meeting. Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved. Ed Bain.
Okay, hold on one second. I've got to track who's saying what. So Steve moved, Ed seconded. Okay, I will need a roll call vote because we've had some other members join in as we've been chatting. Welcome to them. Okay, so roll call vote for approval of the minutes. Steve.
Durrett, yes.
Amy. You're on mute. You can give me a thumbs up if it's a yes. Amy, yes. Ed.
Bain, yes.
Valeria.
Yes.
Okay, so that is, and Edinburgh, yes. And Jennifer, do you vote to approve the minutes of last meeting? She's still coming in, so we'll not count that vote. And so the meetings are approved. Okay, so at this point, I'd like to sort of turn the floor over to Ed. Ed, did you want me to present the document? I have it up here on my system, or would you
Yeah,
like to?
no, why don't you bring it up and I can talk.
Okay.
I did send it out, and it was also uploaded to the shared website, to the shared drive. Sent it out yesterday afternoon.
Okay, folks can let me know when they can see it.
Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah, we're good.
You can make it a little bigger. That would be wonderful.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Like, sorry, I'm having a little computer slowness problem here.
Yeah, it's Fridays. Everybody wants to go home.
Okay, does that look better to folks?
That's much better. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so Ed, why don't you?
Yeah, if you want to
Take us-
just go to table of contents and we'll talk a little bit. Right now we have it broken down, per our outline that we had gone over into right now 5 sections. The first is executive summary, and as I've thought about that more, I think maybe we should just do an introduction, which would that hasn't been done yet. I think that would be more appropriate because we're going to have a last section with our recommendations and action plans, and I think that's where, the document is not so big that you really need a summary in the beginning. I think, people can go to the recommendations and action plan. So I'm going to change that to introduction just to talk about, well, why are we producing this, what it's all about, what our charge was, etc. So that's going to change. The next section is really, we're talking about basically demographics in the housing profile. The purpose of that is to give people sort of a grounding and background in Westborough, where we've come from and where we are now, and also a snapshot of where, our, pluses and minuses, if you will, of our situation. As far as, demographics, our levels of education, occupation, et cetera. And then we go into the residential housing stock, which I was able to get a full dump of every parcel in Westborough, both residential, commercial, and industrial, from John Steinberg, our chief assessor. And from there, it has land use codes and things like that. So it's very, very detailed, and I was able to summarize, and we'll see. We'll look at a few tables as we go through, but it really helps us understand how much housing of different types we have, and relative age of those, and how they came to be with that. So that's that's section 2. So that sort of brings us up to the current. 3 is housing affordability. We start then to tell people about, well, what do we mean by housing affordability? What are measures? And I need, some more help with this whole section, but we want to have some definitions there on income levels that, define what in a 40B is, what is affordable for a house or for housing. We then come down to existing like housing costs, how much affordable housing do we currently have? And this is within the context of 40B, and talk about some of the barriers. Well, what are the challenges to get more affordable housing? If you want to scroll up a bit, Alan, we'll go to section 4. And this starts to talk about the trust, what it is. This is fleshed out a bit from what Hank sent. And basically you can see it talks about, well, what is this trust? What can it do? It's, part of governance here, and any more governance stuff I think would come in this section as we want to add to it. And then lastly, we'll just have our recommendations and action plan. You can see the different subsections there. And then I've just included as an appendix a couple pages, which is the actual trust chapter and section from Mass General Laws. So if somebody wants to dig into, actually go through it, they'll have it in the document. So that's sort of the high level, the 10,000 foot overview. Why don't we scroll down a bit? I'm going to look at some page numbers. I have a printout here. Just some highlights so far. We can see one of the points, and actually Steve mentioned it earlier as we were waiting to start on page 7. You can see population by age, and one of the noteworthy points was if you look down at the 20 to 24-year-olds, you only see it at 3.1%, and it may be reflective of, as my note says, younger people not moving to town for whatever reason. It could be affordability, it could be other reasons as they're starting careers and maybe decide to live in a city, what have you. But it is something that is a dip. Unfortunately, we don't have it broken to 24 to 30-year-olds to see if that really goes through the 30s. But that was one interesting point. You can,
if I can add to that, the information collated by Mass Housing Partnership and their data town service actually looks at different age groups compared to state averages.
Okay.
And I believe in the 20, and I think they break it down in 20 to 28-year-old. I'd have to double check that, but we are 15% below the state average.
Okay, so what was that again? Because I might want to include that in here.
It's from Datatown, the Datatown service for Mass Housing Partnership.
Okay, so Datatown from
and what's interesting about that demographic in particular is it's seen as a critical demographic for economic development.
Okay.
Because that age group tends to shop locally and dine locally, so they tend to help the local economy. They also tend to be single or, if married, not have children yet.
Right.
And so their overall demand on the schools and other municipal services is relatively low, and so it's seen as a desirable population.
Okay. All right. I made a note on my paper copy here to look into that. The next couple of charts, and I need to annotate a little bit more, just shows, if you go to the next page, just some population trends. Obviously, it shows the jump in the 70s, 80s, or rather starting 70s, and then really moving up during the 80s and 90s with the population growth. As Westborough, built out a lot of the farms into single residences. We're looking at about on the population growth. I have to put the numbers in here, but it's about a 10% increase between 2020 and 2040 in population. I'm going to compare that to the state, which I think is looking at maybe 6% at best. So Westborough is probably growing a little bit more than the state on whole. Some of the next pages are they're there's some interest on page 9. I'm just watching my time here. I don't want to take up too much. You want to scroll down. It just shows, this is the table. Steve had a question. Yeah, come back down. Where the, on race, when it says one race, it means a single race only. People aren't, it's not mixed race. So people have identified, like I am white and white only, or in black or black only, etc. So that's what that means. And as you can see, that's a fairly high number in the total population. Asian, obviously, as you will notice being around town, particularly South Asian population has really grown in Westborough, making up almost a quarter of the population these days. Other races, particularly black, unfortunately, is still very low compared to state averages. We can skip. You can go to the economy, page 10, talks about some, employment. And one question I had on that was whether we should include, I can get data for employment by industry. Obviously, we have a lot of healthcare, education, professional services, things like that. So,
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble here. It's bouncing around a little bit. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Yeah, so I have it coded in yellow there, which you can see. So should we include data on employment by industry, or is we're just getting too much into the weeds for our purposes? I mean, we're sort of showing that this is Westborough is generally a professional, fairly reasonably affluent, I guess I should say, town, and maybe this is enough. Or we leave it like now. We don't focus too much on it.
Hold on. So it jumped down, but here is, so I pulled up the individual's income in the past 12 months.
Right. So that shows, that really shows it at and this is individual. This is not household income, a median income per individual that is working. Or the population, I shouldn't say that's working, of the population 15 and over, that's individual. Our family, I believe median is 110 to 120, somewhere in that range.
Okay.
That may be helpful to put in, if not as a table, just as a note I'm making down. So we'll do family income or household.
That might be interesting, just because a lot of the affordable housing metrics scale based on family unit size.
That's true.
And so household income is often the determining factor there.
Okay. I'll make that note. I don't need necessarily a table, or we'll see. I'll figure something out. We then this is where I think we get into interesting stuff on the poverty level. Once again, this is as of 2018. I don't think things have changed. If anything, they may have gotten worse with the pandemic. But we can see that we have 4.2% of the population below the poverty line. And that's defined on that insert blue background table. What are various levels, which does drive access to affordability.
Okay, and then you have the additional information.
Right. Then if you scroll down, now this here, as you can see, and what's the most, I think, telling is as you look at different, and there's a lot of overlap here. These aren't just age groupings; they're age groupings, but they overlap. But when you look down at the 65 and over, so basically somewhat retirees, although a lot of people are working past 65 these days, it's 6.7% of the 65 and overs are below the poverty line in Westborough. And as we've heard, and as a lot of the mitigation from Pulte was directed, was to help with elderly housing costs, to create that. So this bears up the fact that, yeah, there are a reasonable percentage of people out there that need help, at all ages. I mean, but particularly as you get into the elderly. Anything particularly on this? Anybody, either now or after you've had a chance to look at it a little bit, other numbers people would like to see, or more of a dive in? So
I think that this is great general background information on the demographics of Westborough. I think the next level will be some of the data that's available specific to housing affordability. And,
right.
I know you've got information about the housing stock.
Right.
And, in information about rental units and the percentage of rental versus ownership. I think it'd be good to pull in the data, some trend data on housing burden.
Right. We'll do that in the affordability.
The affordability components, looking at percentage of housing burden for both, separately for ownership and for rental.
Right.
And it might also be good to provide some benchmarks selectively against our data dashboard communities.
Right. That was a question I had. I haven't done any comparative charting in anything here, because some of the dashboard communities are not, in my opinion, good comparers for for housing.
Right.
They are for other government services, like schools, like
So the purpose of the data dashboard was to find a set of communities that in the aggregate are good comparisons. So
right.
Some of them are very good comparisons relative to the way school systems operate and educational outcomes.
Right.
Others are very similar to us in demographics. Others are more similar to us in how we do DPW, or in the type of DPW level of service we have, or public safety. So none of them are really a perfect match, but it is the benchmark that the town is using. So understanding that some of these communities are better comparisons to us with respect to housing, we still want to provide that consistent comparison across, because it has been decided, by that data dashboard committee across departments and boards that these are the communities we want to compare against.
Okay. I have pulled data for some.
I have a couple of comments, Ed, in regards to, some of the questions you pose as you go through the report. And the thing that struck me was, we're talking about current period, and although I always find it interesting to read historic stuff, but I think anything older than, say, 1980, 1970 is really doesn't serve our purpose in this, because we're really looking, in my own mind, we're looking at trends that are probably even not any older than 10 years, because the town, as we see, based on the population distribution of ethnicity, is totally different in the last 10 years than it was prior to that. So that's one comment. And the other is, I guess, just to pick up on Alan's comments about the data dashboard. I mean, that purpose of that, as I recall, was primarily for use by the various boards and committees in response to why do we do what we do and what do we bring before the town meeting and how does what we're asking for compare to what other cities and towns that you might consider as being similar to Westborough. I mean, that was its purpose. And I would offer here that once we put together stuff that's informational, that tells us what others do, we end up as a town deciding our own answers to the questions that we have. And so, I don't see necessarily that the comparison to other cities and towns around us for this particular purpose, it's going to be as useful as one might think. And the reason is very few of them around us have more than 10% affordable housing to start with. And therefore, I see us as a group and hopefully as a town, as a leading light going forward to figure out how we can create affordable housing that's the most useful to this town. And I don't necessarily care, what that would look like as compared to any other town. I mean, each town does what it does on the basis of its need. And I see us as having met the goal that the state has asked for 20 years, exceeded the goal and continue to exceed the goal based on what you have in the tables here, Ed. But to create an opportunity for us to create affordable housing pretty much within the housing infrastructure that we have by use of clever understanding of the way the state's funding and how we get the most bang for the buck with the dollars we use. I think on a sidebar in the past, we discussed the fact that if we build from scratch affordable housing, it is so expensive, on the order of $400 to $500 a square foot, which is comparable to doing schools. And that's because the criteria for new municipal buildings for housing is astronomically expensive. And there isn't going to be that much help except what we get from gifts and grants and perhaps other things that happen in the town. So, like I said, I think as a sidebar, I'm hopeful that we will create unique approaches to affordable housing that is not only affordable for the people who are going to live in it, but affordable for the town to create it. And at the same time, not so screw up the fabric of the town by virtue of, Russian-style block apartment buildings that serve the purpose, because my personal interest is not to do that. My personal interest is to provide the housing using a lot of smarts, if you will, to convert perhaps existing housing to the purpose. So anyway, I guess I've exhausted my thoughts on this one at this time.
Alan, can I ask a question to piggyback on that? So I think it was our first meeting, we had talked about the possibility of identifying maybe worn down or run down properties in town. So how would that work? Like, if let's say something at 123 Main Street was, a hot mess, something that the town wanted to buy. So would the town purchase the property, pay for the renovations, and then continue to own it? Or would they sell it to somebody to be the landlord for the affordable housing? How does that work?
Okay, so stepping back, it wouldn't be the town, it's the trust.
Okay,
right?
sorry.
And so one of the things we need to keep in mind is that once funds move into the trust, from the town's perspective, the money's been allocated and spent. It's no longer, the funds are no longer the town's, they belong to the trust. So the question is, how would the trust do that? So affordable housing trusts, and there are a number of examples where a trust will buy a property at market rate, if it's, when it's for sale, contract out for any necessary renovations to make it fully habitable, bring it up to code, any necessary improvements, and then can redeed it as affordable, and then place it in and run a lottery to sell it. The trust can also decide to hold on to that property and start functioning as a landlord, and put it into the lottery for as a rental unit. and that would go through the, the normal DHCD rental lottery process, just as a sale goes through the state's lottery process for purchasing affordable homes. The trust can maintain the ownership of the property and contract with the housing authority to manage it and maintain it and collect the rent and work with the tenants, so we don't need to build and recreate that infrastructure. The trust could also sell the property to the housing authority or lease it, or transfer it. Other ways we can end up with property that we rehab is if the town takes property from people who failed to pay property taxes. The town could vote to transfer that property to the trust, or the trust could acquire that property from the town without the property having to go to auction.
Okay.
So there are ways for other types of property. The trust can accept a gift. So someone could, in their estate plan, transfer property, as part of their estate to the trust for use as affordable housing. If there's housing or real property that comes to the trust that isn't suitable is affordable housing for us to rehab and do something with, the trust has a right to sell that property and use those funds for other affordable housing projects. Or we can hold on to that property and use it as collateral to borrow money for other projects. So there's a lot of flexibility in what the trust can do, but we can certainly, and there are trusts, it tends to be smaller communities where the aggregate number of units they need or want to produce in affordable housing is lower. And sort of the housing demographics of the town are more suited to it. There are trusts that in particular will each year purchase and convert 1 or 2 homes in their community, and that serves them well.
Jump under that. Oh, sorry. Like, if we were to identify, because this is something that Amy and I probably are sharing a mindset on. Like, there are properties, buildings in town, for example, the one next to a video that has been laying vacant for years and years and years and years. So I don't know if that's something that, would we as a group would go to that building owner and say, hey, do you want to give this to the town? Maybe they get a tax deduction for it and the town actually ends up getting something like that. I mean, how do we actually go about identify? I can identify a bunch of properties. How would we go about it from there?
So if there's a property we were interested in for conversion into affordable housing, we as the trust would directly approach the sellers about how we might acquire that property, whether it was a purchase or a gift. We would have the legal authority, and if we decide once the trust is created, if the trustees decide that that's the approach they want to take, that's a perfectly valid approach. That said, there are issues with construction, as Steve mentioned, right? That trigger what I forget the code. I believe it's 30B, Chapter 30B, which is about government spending on capital projects, right? And we get into things like prevailing wage, which make the cost per square foot expensive. So the other thing the trust can do is they can go to a landlord, property owner, and say, we'd like to have this property acquired as affordable housing, and we can find effectively go out to bid and find a nonprofit developer, and there are those that specialize in this, who would acquire the property and do the project. And as a trust, there are ways that we can help fund that project. So we can provide loans to a private developer to get them through the permitting process, so they don't have to tie up their capital and pay high interest rates for all of that money. We can contribute to renovation costs. There's a development down in Yarmouth where a private developer bought an out-of-business hotel.
Yep.
and the trust provided $30,000 per unit, and they ended up with 69 units of senior affordable housing. And it was a private nonprofit developer. And so there are ways to do it where through public-private partnership between the trust and private developers, as Steve said, you can get more bang for the buck than us being a general contractor and being the property owner.
Because that particular property is just begging. I mean, people are working from home now anyway. So for a commercial building, I see that it's basically ineffective anymore. And it's just been sitting there for years and years and years. It's basically already constructed. I don't know what it looks like inside. So
yeah, I know the facility you're talking about. I mean, it might be worth a look. I know inside it's configured. That was the old Reliant location.
Right.
Yeah. So it's actually outfitted for medical use. Right. Which generally means that it's got some complexities with respect to HVAC and plumbing.
What about the movie theater?
Probably
hold on, Steve. Go ahead,
for
Steve.
handicapped access.
Steve, you got stepped on. If you could repeat that.
Yeah, because it was a medical facility, it probably already complies with handicapped access.
Right.
And the mechanical stuff is cheap money to improve if necessary. And so, yeah, it really might be a great candidate for what we're trying to do here.
I would think one of the things we could put into the action plan is to create a inventory, or at least a list of possible properties, that were suitable for conversion, because I also agree that build from scratch is very expensive versus taking an existing, even if it's just a basic shell and then retrofitting that into apartments would be much more viable and would also have a shorter term result. Could fast track things. Okay. Why don't we get back?
I'm actually, let me reel that in a little bit. Remember that our mission is to really have town meeting approve the creation of the trust.
Yeah.
And to do that, we certainly want to provide guidance in the types of projects that we might pursue. Mm-hmm. I guess I would hesitate to start talking about potential projects. Simply because that might, I guess I would worry that the discussion would become about whether or not the community supports any specific projects versus the concept of having a trust that could then go pick projects and move forward.
My point was not so much to identify specific things and publish them in the document, but rather as an action item, saying we will be looking at doing this. I'm just saying, it's one of the next steps. Not the last thing you want to do is either bird dog potentials or raise that where people can say, well, that's next to where I live, and have that. Why don't we move on? I know our time is off a little bit. I mean, obviously people can go through. Steve, I picked up from one of your comments, basically like on the housing inventory. Maybe I just cut back and show, pre-1970 or pre-1950 total, and then do detail going forward. Just, we don't need to go back to the 1800s.
So what I'm going to suggest is that it's hard to do detailed document reviews in this form. However, also I need to remind folks or just point out that any comments that we provide, Ed, on the document need to become part of the public record.
Yep.
And so what I would suggest is that if, and I can help Ed with this if you need help with the mechanics of the word processor a little bit, if people send any comments or feedback to add in their version, in the Word version that was shared out with everyone, Ed can consolidate those into a single document that shows everybody's comments that we can then post as part of the public record.
Yeah,
And in our next meeting, we can accept those as the comments we've received as part of the public record, and then Ed and Hank and the team can continue to move forward in making revisions and coming in, in the next round of updates.
I would include that as an appendices because the committee itself has to have its own its own action on the entire package, i.e., we accept or reject. And although comments from anywhere are useful and helpful, ultimately it's the committee's majority vote, I think, that sets whatever goes into this report. And just to keep ourselves separate from other outside drivers. Obviously transparency is important, but still it's the act of the committee that does this.
Right. So what this would do is there'd be a version of the document that included all of our comments, so that our comments, but is the documents being drafted by, a team within the committee, that team would then draft the next revision, take into consideration the comments, and then that version comes back for a review again. So the committee still as a whole will vote on the content of the document and the final wording. I just want, from an open meeting and a public record standpoint, to make sure that rather than having us go off, review the document, come back into public meeting, and each of us read each of our comments into the record, that we do it, that people provide their comments to Ed. We produce a single document that lists everybody's comments so that we can bring that into the public record and the team can continue moving forward with updating and editing and in consideration of those comments.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is, yes, we put all the comments that we receive wherever, that have been officially transmitted to the committee in a single document. But I would not suggest that we show how we dealt with each one of those comments in the document. That's what
True. No, that I agree with that. That's appropriate.
I think what would be
like on one of the things that was just said, and I think philosophically, this goes back to the discussion that Ed was commenting on. One of the things that I think we can add to the report is the philosophy of what it is we think we want to do as a committee relative to the creation of the trust, i.e. what its direction would be. But also, once the trust is created, now it becomes a new entity, and the entity is to try to further its purpose. And therefore, there's a number of things that are going to have to be done in executive session that can't be available to the public. For example, the negotiating philosophy of how you buy something. And I would also suggest all of us, because we are inside the box, if you will, to review, I think it's section 258. Ed, you had listed it in terms of, the rights and responsibilities of committee members. And the reason why I bring it up, I'll publicly announce that my purpose in what I was doing for the town's sale of the house on, behind Town Hall was to hold it in abeyance so that the selectmen had more time in order to put it out to bid again. However, there were issues associated with Section 258 that I was subject to as having been a person involved in the development of the study itself. And we're all in the same boat this time in terms of what we do professionally. As an engineer, there's potential, I guess, down the road that I might be asked by somebody to have something to do with one of these future projects. As a realtor, you may also have the same potential conflict. And so I think all of us need to read that section of the general laws that deals with conflict when you are a member of a municipal committee. And so I just point that out because it makes a difference in what you do.
But and that's good to point out, and that will definitely be a factor for anyone who becomes a trustee. John, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just had 3 quick questions. First, can non-members comment on this? Myself?
Yes.
Right. So another logistical question is, this is in Word. I have Google Docs. I don't have Word. how is the best way to formulate my comments so that Ed will be able to work it into the document?
If you open it, the Word document with Google Docs, you should be able to add comments.
So either,
and then
I'm saying the track changes usually doesn't carry over appropriately.
Right. If I
so-
can, Alan, given that I've been putting this together, what I would recommend is that people email. That way we have a nice clean record of who it came from, when it came in, etc. And what we do is we create a, if you will, log. I'll use the word log. That's a bad word, but a separate document, which is a comments document, which will not make its way verbatim into, what we've been reviewing, but it's made public. And from that, I can read in. So somebody can say, hey, Ed, in section such and such, I think you should reference such and such or include some numbers from things like that.
Okay, so we can do that. Ed, why don't I offline show you how we've managed this with some documents at the Board of Selectmen? As far as so certainly sending them by email is fine. John, if you want to bring that into Google Docs and bring your comments in, I can convert it back to Word with the comments.
Okay.
For Ed.
All right. So Ed kind of answered my third question, I think. Are you looking for more just substantive comments or even formatting comments? Are we not focused on
anything that helps make the document better?
In that log formatting comments are going to be too difficult to track.
Yeah, I think some of the formatting, there is a style sheet associated with this. So there's definitely a consistency in by applying that style sheet to the look and feel, et cetera. So hopefully it's more formatting would be, well, can you take this table and put it before that one? Or maybe put a separate call out box with this terminology, things like that. Obviously doing wordsmithing, doing spell check or phraseology or things like that, I think should be able to be done more from I'd reword this way, and that could be made into comment. I hear what you're saying, but I hopefully we don't have to do a lot of detailed tweaking within the doc.
Okay. Maybe I'll just go offline with Alan and see if
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. But to answer your thing, anything that you think can help in general presentation and content, both levels of detail or non-levels of detail would be welcome. Very welcome.
Okay.
Thanks, John.
Cool.
Why don't we?
Any other questions or comments or about next steps with respect to the document? Okay. Any final comments, Ed?
No, you could see the different sections. 4 is what Hank did. I just basically took that, formatted it up. I don't know with the governance. I actually didn't read this real close, whether some of the governance should belong in here, but that's the next topic. So that's a segue in. Otherwise, we're making progress. We're 2 weeks out from needing a fairly final version. And I think we're in pretty good shape. We're on a good timeline.
Yeah, Ed, just a comment. In your document, actually, governance, although not called that, is provided almost in identical detail to what Hank has twice. So
okay.
I think that's covered. Yeah, and that's not a negative comment. It's just in there in the right way in 2 places. That's all. Okay. But you do have the detail.
Okay.
Okay. And which is a great way to segue. We're a little behind on the governance side. Hank did send out a document. I can pull it up as well for the viewing public to see.
Did you get the revision last night, 7:30?
I believe I did.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, I've blown it up a little bit on my screen, so the formatting of it's a little off as you look at it. But it provides the format of the trust, oversight and limitations, and funding and management. And so I know, Steve, if you want, are you comfortable introducing this? I know you worked with Hank a bit on it.
Can I
have
ask
to admit, go ahead, Ed.
Yeah, I have a question. In the document that I sent out, I took what Hank originally sent to me, or at least to me, and formatted it into the document. I just want to make sure, was there a newer version of that? It looks pretty similar. I'm looking at the screen and I'm looking at my paper version of section 4.
There were a couple of changes, I believe. Go ahead, Steve.
I was just going to say you might have picked up typos and things like that.
Okay.
In reading this as compared to what you had, Ed, I honestly didn't see any differences. It's just formatted in this document in a way that's perhaps more readable than the version that comes out of state law. But they've got to be identical except for a few word changes here and there.
All right, I'll go through it.
Yeah.
Okay. So
go ahead. So,
well, I was going to say, go ahead, Steve.
Well, I read through this, and the formatting makes it understandable in my own read of it as compared to the stuff that came out of chapter whatever it is, 55. This is a duplicate of what's required by the law and the way the law is written. To the fact that the wording is nearly identical. And I only would offer a couple of changes to it for my own interest, I guess. One is a section of what the trust can do and who they can hire. And it goes on and says lawyers, CPAs, et cetera. I would add in that list, because I don't think it's contrary to the list, the word consultant. And let's say, for example, consultant in this case might be a geotechnical engineer rather than, quote, engineer, because they are a different breed. And if you've got a foundation issue, that's who you want to talk to. So I would add that in the section where we talk about who the trust could hire. And then in the last paragraph, I think, which deals with financing and process or something like that, I would add the section that comes from Mass General Law that says that the trust will conduct an audit of its financials every year, which is not in what Hank put in this thing, but it is part of the general law. And since the candidates for the trust, it would be appointed for 2-year sessions. I think an audit every year protects all the players, the new players and the old players.
Right. So an annual audit is required under
Yes.
Mass General Law, and typically that is, I agree it should be called out here. Typically, if the trust has an agreement with the town for the town treasurer and director of finance to manage the funds, then the trust audit is included in the overall audit of town accounts that's done annually for the town. And that's...
Okay, but that audit is done by an outside agency, is it not?
It is, yes.
Yeah, that's the only thing I would think is important, so that, there aren't any internal players that have to do with the audit. It's an external audit by professionals that know what they're doing. And ultimately, it protects everybody to have it done that way. So that's the reason why I have it. And otherwise, I think it's concise. It's what the general law says. It does what is needed. And I think Hank's advice as well that came with his email that transmitted it is great advice. So
now, Steve, you said this was something was sent out last night or yesterday?
So I'll make sure you have the latest copy, Ed.
Okay.
And I guess so some of what Hank put forth to everyone is actually differs from Mass General Law as far as what Mass General Law involves and is a bit more restricted. So if people look at the section on trustee appointing authority, membership, staffing, and meetings, for example, item, when we look at item 2, the board of trustees will consist not less than 5, not more than 9. That's state law. We need to decide how many we want on the trust. And I did send Hank and Steve some comparative information on a number of trusts. Some do 5, some do 7, some do 9. There's some that say 5 to 7, where you don't force filling vacancies until you go below 5 to give the trust time to find people with specific expertise and not rush appointment filling. Item 3 on that list, he's saying he does not believe that trusts should employ dedicated staff. In my conversations with Mass Housing Partnership, that's contrary to best practice. That housing trusts that are actively engaged in projects might have a need to hire dedicated staff because town staff might not have the time or the resources or the expertise for that specific project or that specific function. Trusts are allowed to use town staff. Typically, that would require Board of Selectmen approval, and trusts can also compensate the town for any town staff that they hire or use. And so I think I'm not saying
Hank's philosophy. The other part of this document says that the trust can hire anybody it needs when it needs to, and lists who they are.
Right. That's the law. Right.
Yeah, and I think his interest here is to say at this time, and we could rephrase this, but to the extent that what you actually just outlined, Alan, was because a specific project needs certain people. Okay, and in which case the trust can hire those people, and they wouldn't necessarily be permanent. They would be for the duration of the trust. And I don't think that contravenes what he's saying in item 3 here, which is generally we would not have permanent employees. What it does say is we can use other town employees that we would compensate them for the work they do, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't see, maybe what we do is rephrase this that we wouldn't have a dedicated employee unless required, so that in fact town meeting vote is complete.
Yeah, well, and I just want, many trusts have a full-time or part-time administrator. To manage meetings, to manage ongoing, to manage meetings, to manage the process, ongoing documentation requirements, things of that nature. So I'm not suggesting we discuss what the changes are. I'm pointing that I think these are areas for discussion over the next couple of weeks. Because also under when we look at oversight and limitations, he is promoting that any acquisition or disposition of real property would require the authorization of Board of Selectmen. That's a pretty high level of oversight. Most trusts have oversight that trigger when there's a certain percentage of assets put into play. So, if a trust is going to commit 80% of its assets, then it would need, they would go to the Board of Selectmen for approval. The other issue is that certainly the trust can use town council. Transactions for the trust don't need to be by town policy. They have to be compliant with state law for trust transactions. And so those transactions would be reviewed by council. The trust could use town council, again, through the prior provisions, or trusts can hire their own counsel to provide that legal advice. So I think there's some areas for discussion that we want to say, because it comes into what gets drafted in the trust and the limitations that get put on the trust. So even though state law says the trust can hire staff, including dedicated staff, if we write a version of the trust that says it can't happen, then we can't do that. And so as people read through this, just understand that the exact wording of our trust is what we'll be discussing within the confines of what's available in Mass General Law.
Okay, just a thought for everybody along the lines of what Alan has just suggested is, if we pretty much restrict ourselves to using town employees, for example, when you have a pandemic and you send half your people home trying to do 100% of the work, they're not going to be available for something like the trust. The trust as an economic entity trying to perform a business service, needs to be able to react to, to its employee functional needs without restriction. And so I guess I would agree that now with Alan that we have to make sure that we don't lock ourselves out.
Right. And so I guess what would be a helpful next step on this process, and I can loop back with Hank, is to get a sense of what other trusts have decided on some of these factors, right? And so that we as a working group can have, a survey spreadsheet or something that we can review, and then we can have a discussion on some of these key points to decide, what we think would work best for Westborough. From my personal perspective, I think we want to give the trust the greatest latitude possible, but provide a level of governance and oversight that is comfortable for the town, right? And that's definitely a delicate balance. So does anyone have any other comments or input on the Section 4 content on the governance?
Right. It just not so much a comment as much as what I think I'd like to do is it's easy to reformat the stuff that Hank did. It only took me, like 20 minutes or so, what Hank said originally. What I would suggest is that Steve, Hank, you, whoever, work on whatever you find convenient as far as the content piece, wording, etc. When you're done, or you feel you have a as good as it's going to get version, then send that to me, and I'll slide that into Section 4.
Okay, I don't mind doing that. I guess what I would do first is I'm going to find out the differences between the first version and the revised version, and then highlight those, and then work on the sections that we sort of have a generic comment about in terms of what Alan just supplied as a potential philosophy for this review, and use that. And I can circulate that to the group for comments, and then once we get comments, we can send it off to Ed to incorporate it into his document.
I think that works well, because this is, unlike other sections, will not have like lots of charts and graphs and things that are more, I'll use the word problematic for layout purposes. This is mostly narrative and lists and things like that. So it's easy to incorporate it. That's my point.
Okay, cool. Yep. Okay, so I guess as an action item, if people have comments or thoughts on this content, to email Hank and Steve, and they'll pull those together as well. And at a future meeting, we'll have a facilitated discussion on some of those points, so we can come to resolution and finalize how we think the governance should work. Does that work for everyone?
Yep. Ellen, do you have a copy of the governance between the town and Westborough TV? Because it's not a dissimilar approach to things. They're a quasi-independent group with oversight.
Yeah, I could look at that. let me see if I can get I don't have a copy. I could see about getting hands on that and see if that's helpful. You know, I did share a summary spreadsheet of a number of other housing trusts.
Yeah, I remember that.
That sort of do a comparison and in the range, and we can look at the pro and cons of that as well. I'm trying to think if there are other. I was going to say looking at housing authority because that's statutory, like a trust is, but though there is no, other than acceptance of the statute, there is no, other than the statutory component, which is very limited for housing authorities, there's nothing additional above and beyond the statute that's in place with the Westborough Housing Authority, as far as town governance.
Right.
And so, but
it's actually an agency, I think, and the role the town has, I believe, in the housing authority is to appointment of one of the members.
Right.
I believe.
So the role that the town has with the housing authority is they can appoint the resident representative if the housing authority doesn't have a process to do that, and they can appoint the gubernatorial representative if the state doesn't make that appointment and the seat is vacant for 120 days. And the Board of Selectmen have the right to remove an elected member or an appointed member of the housing authority following a public hearing.
Yeah, right now there's only two appointed, I think, and the state and resident ones are open now.
No, on our housing authority, the Board of Selectmen filled the resident representative and the gubernatorial appointment.
Right, but I'm saying it's just the state and the tenant representative. There's no, according to the website.
The website needs updating. All 5 seats, believe me, all 5 seats on the housing authority are filled.
Okay.
We just refilled the gubernatorial appointment at a recent Board of Selectmen meeting, and the other 3 seats are elected. So let's move on. We're a little behind schedule, but I don't think we're in trouble yet. To talk about community engagement plan. So I'm sort of going to flip the order a little bit and start with the co-urbanized update. We have confirmed Mass Housing Partnership is going to contract with co-urbanize to pay for the service. We're still waiting to hear back. Their initial thought was that they were going to be paying for it from town meeting in March through town meeting in October. So roughly 6 months. Given the delay with COVID-19, I've asked if they would still consider funding it beyond fall town meeting into November or December a little bit, give the new trust a chance to decide if they want to spend the money to maintain the service, or give the town an opportunity to say if it's something that the town might want to do for all boards and committees. I'm waiting to hear back on the specific time length, but at least through getting us to, special fall town meeting in October or November, whenever it's going to be held, they've agreed to do that. There's a kickoff meeting Monday afternoon at 4 p.m. For anyone who's wants to help run the system and help administer our content. So if a few people have expressed interest, let me know. You'll need to go set up an account in advance, and then they'll connect your account to our project. I set up my account already. What's nice is the only personal information that you need to provide is your name, your email address, and your zip code. So no addresses, no other things like that become part of the system. So it's I think it's good that way. So we can start having discussion about the types of content we want to put on co-urbanize. I think we'll have a better idea about what's possible next week. As we've talked previously, obviously some educational information about, what is affordable housing, what's housing affordability. I think some of the data that Ed's pulling forward in our report, some of the information from the housing forum in January will be good. A friend of mine said, it would be cool to do a video FAQ, where each of us make a short video where we, put up a slide with a question like, what is affordable housing? And we give a definition, sort of to humanize it. So we can think about that a little bit. I want to get a sense, I don't know if the community team had a chance to meet since our last meeting. So Amy and Valeria are on. An update sort of on the community side. Are we moving forward? If not, how can we help, and what do we want our next steps to be? And Jennifer, all three of you are on. So someone. Oh, Jennifer, you're on mute.
At this point, we have not connected.
Okay. Is that something you'll be able to do within the next several days or the next week?
We can make it happen.
Okay, cool. Some things I know, John, you shared the survey that was done by the Master Plan Advisory Committee and the results. So for the community engagement folks, looking at those questions and answers, looking at some of the data that Ed's pulled forward, it'd be great to brainstorm questions for a community survey, get people's sense of what they think we need and what approach approaches or types of projects, whatever they might be interested in, other things of that nature. And beyond having co-urbanized running, start maybe some brainstorming on other ways we can do community engagement. Groups, I know people are meeting virtually, but maybe we can Zoom bomb the Rotary Club and the Women's Club. Maybe the library is interested. Maybe Westborough Connects would be willing to have us do, a video, an online event of some sort, and they could help get, tap the community for community participation. So along those lines would be helpful in moving forward.
Okay.
Okay. If you want to let me know when you're meeting, that'd be helpful.
Okay.
And if you have any questions or you need help with facilitation, let me know. I'm happy to do that as well.
Thank you.
Okay. So that brings us to next steps and action items. Given where we are with respect to pulling together our deliverables and the discussions we need to have, I know we originally said we meet every other week, which would put our next meeting on the 28th. I'm wondering if folks are available and would be willing to add a meeting on the 21st, next Friday. Specifically so we have some time to discuss some of the components around governance, around the data, and at that point, co-urbanize, the system should be up and running, and we should hopefully have, I'm willing to work next week on content, have some initial content so that we can get that part of the project moving forward.
Alan, I would support that. I think just allowing us, because we do have, we've set a deadline of, first week in September, I think, to try to get a hopefully approved document or really, really close document ready. So I think it's good to have a meeting in a week, focusing on key deliverables or key aspects of what we need to do. We don't need to go through necessarily every, point, but we really need to make sure that we're on top of stuff so that we can deliver, what we need to do in enough time in preparation for town meeting. I do have a question. Do you know, has there been any discussion about moving the October meeting?
So there has been some discussion with John Arnold about the possible need to move the October town meeting later.
Mm-hmm.
That was done in public session.
Right.
That mostly has to do with the fact that right now the state is month to month on budget.
Correct.
It's a level budget 1/12. We're hoping that, there's a agreement in principle to level fund local aid and school funding.
Correct.
We still want to see a budget for the rest of the fiscal year from the state, which probably won't come till the very end of September. And so from that point, to get warrant articles to update the budget, to take it through the process of review with advisory FinCom and things of that nature, it'd be very hard pressed to do it in October. So there's been some discussion that we may need to move it to early November. That said, in order for the Q3 property tax bills to go out on time, the Board of Selectmen needs to vote to set and confirm the tax rate no later than our second meeting in November.
Really? Even though it doesn't hit till February?
Right, because of the work that has to go from the time the tax rate is set to the time the tax bills actually go out. There's a whole stuff that has to happen in the background. It goes, I want to say it goes to the Attorney General's office, or it goes to the state for validation. That comes back, and then they've got to actually set up the system. Yeah,
the recap has to go into DOR, I know, and they validate it.
Yeah, so there's some time there when we expect that to be longer than normal. So at this point, until there's actually a decision made, we would plan on the third week of October is when special town meeting is going to happen.
Okay,
it may.
Let's assume that then.
Okay.
That'll go on schedule.
Oh, something I forgot to mention. I was invited on in my role as Board of Selectmen and being on this committee. I was invited on to a taping of Frank and Mary in Westborough, the very popular cable TV show, to talk about the committee and the group, the working group, and the work we're doing. So I've put a link to that recording on our page on the town website. So pull out your critics checklist. If you take a look and let me know, whether it's makeup or hair or content, things of that nature, we'll have more opportunities for that as well. And they definitely want to do more shows on this topic, and so we'll loop and get others of you who might be interested in your television debut maybe involved as well.
Alan, for you, I think we need to make sure that there's a link so we can rank with Rotten Tomatoes.
Okay, we'll see if we can make that happen. That said, is everyone else agreeable to scheduling a meeting for next Friday morning at the same time, or we could do it 8:30 if it's a little easier for folks?
8 is fine. I can't do anything on the 28th. So if it means that, are we replacing the 21st with the 28th?
I think we're adding the 21st. I think we'll still need a meeting on the 28th to finalize things. If you can make the 21st and not the 28th, that's fine.
Okay.
Okay. So with no opposition, then we'll schedule that meeting as well. Okay. Any other issues or new business or action items?
I just want to do a shout out to thank Amy for doing some work on trying to get the pricing of rental housing from us. I know it's not easy. It's like nailing Jello to a tree, I'm sure. I see her smiling, so I assume she's agreeing. So I'll need to get back to you on how we, if you will, expound that out, or take the numbers you got and expand them to the housing stock in Westborough to try to get an idea of how many units are at what rental values, just to with that. So, but thank you.
Thank you. And also thanks to town staff. Ed, I know you worked with the assessor's office.
Yes.
As well as the finance director and her team. And
Yes.
so they were extremely responsive and helpful in getting us need. There's one final action item which will probably come up at our meeting on the 21st. And that is the Board of Selectmen has created an exploratory committee to look at the Community Preservation Act and recommend whether or not now's the time for Westborough to adopt CPA. And if so, how? Because there's options on how you adopt, and just like with the housing trust, there's options for what a CPA, some options for what a CPA might look like for a given community, and the guidance there. As part of that committee, they've asked for one representative who represents the Housing Partnership Committee and our working group. And so I've reached out to Gary Sangranino, I always slaughter his name, Sanginerio, about whether he's going to check with the Housing Partnership to see if one of his members would like to sit on that exploratory committee. I will ask that if anyone in our committee or working group here is interested to let me know as well. I also just wanted to give people a heads up that the Housing Partnership Committee does have an open seat, and they've been accepting letters of interest, and so I expect that that position will be filled at the August 18th Board of Selectmen's meeting as well. So with that, I don't have any additional discussion items or action items or next steps. So I'll go around one more time to see. If not, I could use a motion to adjourn.
So move. Steve Durrett.
Second, Bain.
Okay. Roll call vote. I'm going to start with you, Ed.
Bain, yes.
Steve?
Durrett, yes.
Amy?
Yes.
Jennifer?
Yes.
And Valeria?
Yes.
And Ellen Edinburgh is yes. So with a big shout out and thank you to Westborough TV as well, we are adjourned. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alan.